Welcome. It's our second live panel of the day. We're getting towards the end of Paris Fashion Week, but it's a brilliant show to be talking about because we're discussing Phoebe Philo's Spring Summer 14 collection for Celine. I've also got a very chic, fabulous panel with me. You're really questioning of that, really.
I can go with that. That's right.
But I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Katie.
I'm Katie Barron. I'm a journalist and author, and I work for a creative intelligence agency as well.
Wow. I'm Sarah. I'm Sarah Raphael. I'm deputy editor at ID.
I'm Tremaine Emory, and I help run the London Collection Store, Marc Jacobs London Collection Store, and also consult for Serge Becker for Casa Negra, La Bodega Negra, a few other things.
I feel like I should say wow now. Wow. What have we guys seen from Paris Fashion Week so far? What's impressed you guys? I've already seen you two. What have you seen, Sarah, that you've loved?
Rick Owens, obviously, but probably sounds like a cliche now. I really liked Hussein Shalaya, and I thought that was really interesting. I liked the opening look with the towel. I once wore a towel as a dress to a party at uni, so it was good validation. I thought Com was amazing as well.
Yeah. Did you guys see Hussein or Com? What stood out for you since we last met?
I kind of loved the Yoji show. Mm-hmm. I thought that was kind of incredible because I think it's the sort of thing that anyone else doing that, it could have felt really hackney and almost like some kind of theatrical event, whereas it actually just felt so put together and so cool, and that was great. I think, Rick Owens, again, feels like a bit of a cliche, but has to deserve a sort of special mention, not so much for the clothes, but just for the message. I think it's always good to have someone in Fashion Week pushing a message that goes way beyond their collections. So yeah, that would be, for me, quite like Dries as well.
Yeah,
actually.
Dries was amazing. What have you seen, Tremaine?
Again, the Rick Owens show, which was great on a whole other level. Then, what else have I seen? The Yang Lee. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really good, really good. And then, I don't know, the Lanvin show, but just because it made me think of Studio 54, which is somewhere I wish I was at.
Just made you nostalgic.
Yeah.
Wanted to go there. What made the Rick Owens show so great? Was it because this kind of ties to Celine? Because I think that the vision we see at Celine is very pure, it's very elegant, it's very chic, it's very white. What was it nice to see something that was refreshing at the Rick Owens show? Is that part of the appeal, that it felt so separate from this kind of polished, alien fashion view that we see?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing is with that show is that it really came on the tip of this whole sort of zeitgeist about talking about how whether fashion is actually really anti-inclusive and, having diversity on the catwalk and and to do that in quite a real way. I mean, obviously it was pretty full on, but to have it brought in with that kind of energy and that kind of spectacle, and it hasn't, there hasn't been that many spectacles on the catwalk either.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it was sort of brought on with such full force that nobody could miss it. Yeah.
Mm. Was that part of the? You both mentioned it as well. Was that part of the appeal? How inclusive it felt? Why does high fashion sort of really struggle with inclusivity so much?
Because I think high fashion has so many titles, right? So a model is supposed to look like this, and this type of person is supposed to buy into this lifestyle, and so I guess this show made you kind of question all those titles, preconceived notions. No matter where your mindset is, watching that show, you had to be like, well, what do I feel a model, a beautiful woman is when you're looking at that show? Because all those women they didn't look like what models usually look like, whether it was their skin color, the way their hair looked, their figures. Their weight, everything,
Expressions.
So the expressions, exactly, expressions in their face, and it made you, even if no matter how open-minded you are, it still made you be like, wow. Obviously, you watch fashion shows because you're looking at it, and you're like, wow, this is make me look at it in a different way.
Yeah,
and maybe if you allow it, you'll probably never look at a fashion show the same, unless you just put that out of your mind.
Yeah, especially I think because you kind of talked about in a way how it was plundering a sort of Americana, but it's an Americana that's not so visible because normally if you talk about Americana, instantly you're thinking about the kind of preppy version of Americana or the kind of cowboy version of Americana, and so to actually kind of bring something out that's kind of a huge thing that's going on. I mean, I wasn't even really aware of kind of step as a phenomenon, so even to bring that to my attention, that actually this is a thing that kind of huge numbers of people are into, and this is something that's real, that's happening, to sort of use fashion to bring that out to the forefront. I thought that was pretty fascinating.
And he found them on YouTube as well, which I thought was interesting.
Which
there
is
wasn't
the same
much
with
of
the metal band for the menswear as well.
Yeah.
And I think they prepared over 5 months,
Yeah.
So it was kind of reading that, I was like, oh wow, you know, like the same type of preparation I was put into the clothing, you know, time he puts into the clothing, and you know, his team, same thing was put into like how the clothing was presented, you know. It was really amazing.
I mean, it's kind of weird because it's going to be interesting to see what he does next season now, because the risk with doing something like that, of course, is that it kind of can look like a gimmick, that you kind of bring something out. It's a little bit like with Nicola and bringing out like Rico Genest or something, that, you know, so loads of people were kind of so wowed by that, but will it be a sort of shock value thing to an extent? And where do you go with that, and how do you keep it going, and how do you start actually kind of infusing that into your collections as you go further and further? And it would be interesting to see how other designers react to that, if they react to it at all. But I think, you know, increasingly, you know, you were saying, Tremaine, about, you know, who are designers designing for, and, you know, where are these people and what do they care about? That for kind of quite a long time, fashion's been able to exist in this kind of bubble and just designing for a really sort of narrow view of a woman. And now, because we've got, you know, social media and, you know, all these different avenues, I think designers have to kind of think about that more seriously in a way now. So it kind of brought up quite a few questions about that for me.
That's good you bring that up too, because even if you just get specific, like Black culture, right? In American Black culture, you know, fashion's a huge thing. Like, you know, like even grew up as a kid, you know, big thing to go to Fifth Avenue, whether it was a Gucci store or Versace store, whatever. For so many reasons, whether it's stuff in the music and you know, you could go so deep talking about it, the whole social constructs about fashion and Black culture. So he kind of, I don't know if he purposely did that, but then he kind of tapped into Black culture in such a real way. Like that's a huge part of it, you know, like the Black colleges, even in high school, you know, you go to high school talent show, part of it, there'd be somebody stepping, you know? So kind of taking like the leaders from that and putting them in a show, but connecting it, because there are, whether it's Black culture or whatever culture, there's tons of people who aren't inundated into fashion who do walk into the Rick store or look, especially online, looking at it and care about it and want to be involved and want to know about it. So, you know, I don't know if he's trying to do that at all, but I feel like it's just kind of connecting to just real people.
Yeah. And I'm so glad there were no, like often when you have a spectacle at a fashion show, there'll be the performance or the dance and then the models come in. And like, I was really relieved that there wasn't that, that didn't happen. That it was like, that was it, they were the models and there was no kind of,
That's interesting,
And then also there's a like kind of brutality to it too, like the way the clothing looked on them. Like he didn't try to like, it wasn't like, well, I made this a size 16 for her. It would, like the clothing was almost being torn apart by their bodies and stuff. So that was a whole nother thing too. Like, I don't know, it's just, like literally it's something I could revisit and interpret on the level I was just speaking about before, but then just on that level, how the clothing fit them.
A lot of our panelists have said that this
like he wasn't trying to make hide their bodies or make them look flattering. And what would be flattering to a fashion person, you know?
And people often like talk about the movement of the clothes on the catwalk and when a model's walking down it, but like actually watching them dance and seeing proper movement and kind of it was very interesting to look at the clothes from that perspective.
I found it really interesting when you saw, we talked about this actually when we did the Rick Owens panel, when you saw the still images of movement, it really sort of, as you kind of hinted at there, it upturned our idea of movement on the catwalk, because you often see these still images of models in clothes and you can see their skirt moving and say, oh, look at that amazing movement on that garment, but to see the stills captured in that way with real movement, it really changed how I kind of I thought about the movement of clothes. I think that's a really interesting point.
I love seeing the movement shots actually, because the still shots, a lot of them just look really plain old aggressive, whereas when you saw the movement shots, they look kind of like warrior women, basically, which was a lot more exciting, a lot more, it was more flattering, to be honest, to see that. But
it kind of highlights the difference between looking at a show on star.com and watch, either being there live or watching the stream. Like you had to go and watch the video. There was no way you could just consume the star.com images and have an idea of what it was about.
I want to tie this to Celine, because one thing that's been in the news quite a lot recently about Celine is the real lack of diversity. You know, Iman came out and she said that she wanted to boycott Celine because Phoebe Philo hasn't put out any sort of diversity or used any people of different skin tones other than white on her runways. And she kind of made quite a big point about how why are these accessories so popular? Why is no one calling Phoebe Philo up on this? Why do you think high fashion manages to be so narrow in its perception of beauty, but doesn't get called up on it? You know, that it took Iman coming out to say that, and even that didn't get that much kind of publicity. People still talk about Celine like it's really cool and really great. You think there would be real outrage, but there's not really.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of colour, I really don't know. I find that really bizarre. I mean, I think in terms of kind of what women look like physically, you know, the whole sort of weight issue, I think it's because a lot of people kind of get away with it by saying, well, hey, you know, fashion's about kind of being aspirational, etc., etc. But then, of course, that begs the question: well, what are we being told we should be aspiring to? Which is a slightly strange thing. I mean, colour, I really don't know. I really find that really confusing. I don't know. I mean, obviously, it was the first time this year that Burberry had an Asian girl on the catwalk, and that was almost like, ooh, look, you know, amazing.
Prada casting a black model in their campaign.
Which is very bizarre. And if you think, you know, Burberry is an English label, I mean, Britain, you know, and coming from a headquarters in London, which is such a, you know, cultural melting pot, that seems very bizarre, very strange place that's coming from. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think, I mean, there was the whole backlash of the Prada girl, you know, Malika, I think it was, being, she's not black enough, but it was just like, what does that mean anyway? Like it was, I think there's loads more Asian girls on the catwalk because of the markets in Asia and like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, which is really, really good. But yeah, I mean, consensus, I believe, from when I hear people talk about it, is that there aren't enough black girls on the catwalk, which is what Naomi Campbell said recently. But I don't know why. Who knows why? But
why don't we call? Do you find it frustrating, Tremaine? Do you think people don't call fashion up on it enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's tons of things in society people don't call up for as like race, but I don't know if it's racism. I think it's more like people getting caught up in social constructs. Like, you know, you could use, and also I feel like in the world, you know, first world, Western world, like everything's black and white. Whereas you could say there's no, like, you know, not Asian like, you know, someone Korean or Japanese, but Asian like someone from India. You know, you could say, where's the Native American person? Just, you know, in general, it's all underrepresented, and that's just indicative of the world we live in, you know, and like, so I feel like it has to trickle down from a higher place than fashion. And so, you know, I feel like I can understand, you know, Iman saying that, and I agree, you know, but I just think minorities in general are just underrepresented in the world, not just black people. You know, it's like Hollywood, you know, like I remember watching this thing about, you know, black lead actors and stuff, and it was like this director, he was a white guy, and he's like, well, because it sells more if I have Denzel dating a white woman than if I have Denzel and the black lead actors. That's why, you know. And he's like, to get my film greenlighted, it all comes down to money, you know, on that level. So I don't know if it's a monetary thing, or maybe it's just her world. Her world is, you know, maybe most of her friends are white, but not because she's racist, because that's just the way her world played out. And then, example, you know, like she did the sandals with the fur, right? Part of why she did that, she said, is because she was pregnant at the time. And she was just about being comfortable. Where she said that's the first time when she designed a collection where it's, okay, it's 7, I'm going home because I can't stand up anymore. So that came out of a real place. So for me, reading those articles and hearing those stories, maybe this is just coming from the place of this is her context of her world.
So you don't think there should should be made? You don't think there should be anything where it's a sort of requirement that there's a certain amount of diversity?
No, because I think that causes more problems.
Yeah, it's it becomes contrived. You know, like, you know, my dad, right? My dad works in TV news, CBS in New York, and he's been there for 30. Like I'm 32. He's been there 31 years, and he won Emmy Awards in Atlanta before he moved to New York. So he's really highly decorated photojournalist, cameraman. But he still needed affirmative action to get his job, help him get his job at CBS. So did that change the way anyone felt? You know, yeah, it got him in there, but the real change is when the people that work there, the company or whoever, they feel they're just judging based on skill. So just forcing her. So then next season she has to put a couple black girls, Asian girls. What does that really change if that's not what she's really about? If she's really about just having white women in her shows, she should be allowed to, because you don't have to, E-Man or whoever doesn't have to buy the clothing. You know, Vogue has a problem. They don't have to give her ad space. They don't have to write an article on her. But in the day, that's her choice. You know, it's her world that she's creating. You know? And you can apply that to so many different things.
Totally,
you know?
yeah. And I think if you look at someone like Phoebe Philo, I think, you know, I mean, she doesn't say it is, but it does feel quite autobiographical, her
Yeah.
work, it really does. I mean, like the latest ad campaign with Daria in it, you kind of look at the two of them, and they're almost interchangeable, don't they? In the same way that a lot of stylists will pick girls because there's a representation of themselves by and large. And yeah, you do always feel that it kind of comes from a place that's very much of her own life, because compared to a lot of designers that will say, a collection's based on a kind of thematic or, something they've experienced, particularly in terms of, I visited here, and therefore, like with Dries, it's all about his retrospective at Musée des Beaux-Arts, and then you'll kind of say, yeah, okay, there's flowers everywhere. With her, you sort of feel like she'll tend to say it's more to do with relationships or journeys moving on, or something to do with being a woman right now, or something like that. So it all feels kind of a little bit more, not nebulous isn't exactly the word, but it feels a little bit more abstract, and it feels a bit more about kind of an emotion that she's tapping into, channeling part of her life that she's experienced, because she's only sort of in her 40 or coming up to 40 or something like that. So you kind of feel like she's transitioned a lot, even since she took on the job at Celine, and therefore, yeah, you're kind of growing with her in a way. So you're right. All of a sudden say, well, actually, you need to represent something entirely different now, will completely change the complexion of the whole collection, I think.
And then is it her job to have the cornucopia of every race? Is everyone's job to represent all things through everything they do? Because, like the issues with race and gender and all this stuff in the world, they're way bigger than that. And I feel like they don't get dealt with on a social level. So then people, and I'm not criticizing Iman, because maybe she does know Phoebe Fowler, so maybe she knows something I don't know. So I don't want to assume, but to put that on her, if Iman wants to speak out, someone speak out, we could take it a little higher level and then really deal with it, I don't know.
I think magazines have a different job. I think it's different when all of a sudden, like we were saying, Jordan Dunn, why no sort of cover of British Vogue or something like that. But magazines have a different job to putting out a fashion collection. As magazines, you're kind of
it's not autobiographical.
It's not autobiographical, and you're kind of supposed to be, inspiring your readership and also reflecting your readership to a certain extent. So I think there's the place where you have more of a problem probably than on the catwalks.
I definitely think there's a social responsibility attached to magazines, 100%, and particularly with ID, that's something Terry Jones has always, from when he started the magazine been like, diversity is one of the most important threads of this magazine and of our culture. And I think it's interesting also like how that manifests. For instance, we did an Instagram takeover with Chloe Norgard a while ago, and there was so much backlash about she's so skinny, and all these comments. And then it's like, why aren't you representing bigger models? Why are you putting this? Why is this image on your digital space? And then it becomes it's hard, because the girls that are coming out of the industry are often a certain type, inevitably, unfortunately. But
But also I feel like that's a good point. But I also feel like it's a tug and pull between the people and then the people in Ivory Tower, which is fashion. So it's just like, in the day, if these type of women are being put in the magazine super skinny and unhealthy, if you stop buying the magazine's going to do something different. That's what
also a cycle.
But then the magazine kind of usually dictates what the people feel. So
well, we did an interview quite recently here. I interviewed Alexandra Schulman, obviously editor of Vogue, and she said that she has endless frustrations. She says with the size of models, and she says she's written letters to designers requesting samples in bigger sizes, because it is. I think we've all agreed it's really complex, and that's kind of her point. She was like, we can't shoot girls of different sizes because we can't shoot them in fashion, and she was like, we are a fashion magazine, and if the samples come at a size 8, she was like, we can't just magically change who we're shooting. So I think it's maybe it's the same with the issue of race. It's just this big cycle that everyone's kind of stuck in, where no one quite knows where the point where something gives.
So maybe then Rick Owens is the answer to that. Like, he's obviously made all those clothes in the sizes of those women, but will anyone put one of those women from that show on the cover of their magazine? Like, but also will that show then actually translate into positive publishing? Like,
it's also difficult, I think, because Rick Owens, he is in a place financially where he can do that. But I think for a younger designer, they can't make a collection in bigger sizes. That it will have to be made in a sample size, and I think it's really hard. I think.
So we work
depressing
a lot
conversation, isn't it? We're like, there's no answer.
We work a lot with Karen Franklin at ID. Obviously, she used to be fashion editor. And she works with her All Walks campaign with loads of universities at that level of design students, and they always encourage design students to design for kind of bigger sizes, and they do, but her point is it's much harder for them. They have to order different kind of fabrics, like they have
even
to
just
learn
like the fit models that they're working
exactly,
on.
Like it's much more difficult.
And then another thing, you know, with this discussion, I feel like people have to be honest with themselves. Is like, you know, like where does fashion come from, really? You know, like beyond the casual need of you got to have clothing on. It's a very vain thing, and you know, I feel like people don't. It's like the elephant no one wants to talk about, and that's why a lot of these things. And part of vanity is representing what you think is beautiful, and that's what I feel like, you know, people do in fashion. You know, and for me, I don't know, and a lot of it to do with the way I was raised, where if I see only white women on the cover or white models or whatever, that doesn't. I'm not like, oh well, I'm less beautiful. That's just the way I was raised. I was empowered in that way, and that's the real thing. Is just like, regardless of what media outlets are telling you, you gotta have your own thing, you know. And then I feel like that's the, you know, it has to trickle down from there. Or like, and then education, what you're saying about, you know, the fashion school saying, well, we want you to do all the sizes. It has to start from there. Trying to get it to change from there, that's on, you know, Phoebe Philo and those people if they want to do that. But as far as like for it to become systemic, where it really a real change and like it affects culture, it has to start with education, and then how people feel about themselves and how they feel represented by themselves.
But do you not think it's dangerous how many young people will look up to Celine? Because Celine is such a popular brand, and how many fashion students will look up to that, and maybe even I think the most dangerous thing is not notice it. Yeah. Because I think.
But they're not. I mean, it's not Celine. You know, a large part of the aesthetic is oversized. So I mean, it's not super skinny, like loads of flesh on show. Normally, it's quite loose fitting. And
like a men can wear, you know.
Like it's I don't think aesthetically it particularly. Promotes like a thin aesthetic.
Plus, I do think
I really disagree. I think it promotes such a slender aesthetic.
For the clothing to be so flowy.
I feel like it's if you're not 6 foot and flat chested and incredibly slim, it's. I don't look at. I love Celine, but I don't look at Phoebe Philo's clothes and think they're inclusive in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the sort of the allure of Celine's clothes is actually that they're almost like this kind of weird, perfect celestial woman. Actually, it's like something. She's like an alien woman, pretty much. She's kind of like the height of modernity and then some. It's a slightly strange thing. I was just going to go back very briefly, if I may, to one of Tremaine's points about the fact that I do think people have to realise that fashion is a fantasy. A lot of the time, which doesn't mean it excuses it. It doesn't mean we, you know, whether we're working in magazines or you know, shows or whatever, shouldn't have some kind of social responsibility. But there is sometimes this bizarre kind of attitude that everything we see everywhere in fashion should exactly reflect like every person on the street.
And should be marked against those criteria.
Exactly, and I think that's kind of wrong. It's always been about fantasy. I think maybe the changing point has been that, you know, when I was growing up, the models, it was all about the kind of, you know, Naomi and Cindy Crawford and people like that. And they were almost these kind of glamazons that just kind of were these sort of genetically, you know, extreme sort of perfect women, or not perfect women, but just these kind of creatures, basically. Whereas, you know, as that's kind of moved on, all of a sudden models got way skinnier and we had grunge, and I think that changed things a lot. That all of a sudden you probably had more, I mean, I don't know for sure, but you probably had more health issues and things like that that were impacting negatively. Because before then, I mean, you know, when I was about 14, we bought Cindy Crawford's exercise video and things like that, and you never really believe you're going to look like her, but you're kind of inspired by her, and that's no bad thing. That was quite empowering. I think now it's become, you know, every 14-year-old girl wanting to be a model and thinking, well, if I just get really skinny, that will work. And I think that's the slight difference. And I think we do need to
outside Topshop.
Yeah, exactly. I think we do need to remember that there's, you know, there's that difference in fashion. A lot of it is artifice, and we should remember that, you know, a lot of the stuff.
Do you think that artifice is dangerous given the audience fashion has now? Because I think it's really interesting. You mentioned kind of Naomi and Cindy, but I think in those, perhaps then fashion didn't have the kind of audience it has now. It's such a part of entertainment now through the internet.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess it's about sort of making the audience aware that, you know, a lot of what you see on screen or in shows, whatever, that's all part of the artifice as well, and that isn't real. That a lot of the, you know, even if you see Kate Moss sort of packed, she looks pretty normal when you see her packed, and she's a brilliant model, she's amazing, or she's like super beautiful. But, you know, when you see her in like a Stephen Klein shoot or something, it's a whole different ball game, that these things aren't real. And I think maybe people are buying into the fact that this should be a direct reflection of who we are, and actually it's worlds away, you know.
And I think also in terms of diversity of models look so different now to how they did in Cindy Crawford, like Chrissy Turlington age. Like, they've got really asymmetric faces, like the kind of typical beauty has become very atypical. And like with girls like Kelly Mittendorf and with Lindsay Wixton, and there's tons of them, Andrea Hardin, they don't look typically what you would grew up to think was pretty in England. You know, they look completely different, and I think that is pushing an image that's totally diverse. And
Crystal McMenamin's still massive, I think.
yeah, and then with Lily
even
as
just
well.
the whole gap tooth thing, that's probably done huge amounts for the dentistry industry. Kids that used to always wear braces probably don't care anymore, so maybe we are.
And it's like particularly at ID, especially when you're faced with a very, very typically pretty girl and someone who has interesting features. You will always go for the person who has interesting features. It's not, if anything, like the pretty girls are being much more sidelined now in favour of what looks interesting and different.
Let's talk a bit about Celine as a label, because this is fascinating, but I'm conscious that we have a lot to talk about. Why did it become such a cult label?
In part because of her and the way she dresses. I think if you take the things that have become trends, like the camel coat, like her pool flip-flop slide things that everyone started wearing, and the way she wears Nike Air Max with smart trousers, like those three things have caught on as enormous trends across the fashion industry, across fashion at every single level. I think she has that power because, you know, as you were saying before, Katie, that she doesn't really over-intellectualize her clothes. When you talk to her, you're like, oh, what's it about? There's no idiosyncrasy. She just says love, life, emotion, and you're like, and but it's very kind of that, you know, when it's a designer who's designing from he was inspired by a trip to wherever in the world that you've never been to, and it's like, okay, but hers is such a common language that I think that's why it's very accessible.
She definitely feel like, even if some of the stuff isn't sort of super easy to wear unless you're a certain shape, it still like feels like a woman designing for women to me, and I think that's a big part of the appeal. I think the fact that there's something about, you know, again, it's that sort of ultimate in sort of modernity, that sort of slightly boyish tailoring, kind of ever so slightly sort of nonchalant. She sort of bridged a gap between really sophisticated high fashion, but it didn't have to necessarily be sort of glamour all the time. She made, you know, so ultimately it was kind of high fashion, but quite cool
really
high fashion. Yeah, exactly. And
Anna Wintour said about her a while ago, she was like, Phoebe designs clothes for girls who go to the office and don't want to look like their mums, which I thought was quite...
That's actually really
I mean, if you take out the price bracket of that, that sentiment. But it's, as an ideology, I think that's why it works.
It's interesting because we did our Dior panel and we were throwing around the words modernity a lot, obviously, because we were talking about Raph, and I asked what is modernity, what do we mean when we say that, and everyone kind of settled on this idea of ease and a lack of embellishment. And I was thinking, is that part of the success of Celine? It seemed... I hate using minimalism because it's such an overused word in fashion. I'm not sure anyone quite knows what it means right now. But do you think it was that kind of real pared back lack of embellishment that made it feel so new?
Yeah, I think also with modernity with her, it's about not borrowing from the past. If you know, that's the thing, it's almost verging on sort of futuristic in a way, that you never feel like this is someone that's brought in some kind of thematic, so her clothes will never feel theatrical with it. You know, I think it's that kind of, in a way, that sort of, the minimalism side, the sort of slightly reductionist side of it, that's what makes it feel like it's never looking back, it's never kind of overstating things, like,
And then just to hark back, I think the main thing with Celine and what has its position in the fashion world is just, like, again, you said Phoebe Follow, like her reverence. And I feel like that's what makes a label or anything, whether it's a writer, movie director, is the reverence that person has. So then it's just like, it's become so synonymous that, you know, like, you're somehow attached to this person if you wear this, or you're somehow attached to Woody Allen if you go to this film, or this and the third, and that's what she's attained. And no one attains that on purpose, you know? It just happens.
There's a sort of,
that's so interesting.
Clarity to it that's quite empowering as well, because I think before she said, you know, I mean, I wouldn't exactly use the phrase timeless because it almost infers something a bit conservative and classic, and I'd never say that she's conservative, but I think, you know, you could definitely... It's not that kind of same rush to have something that's sort of super new every season and, oh my God, I'll ditch all my other Celine stuff. It's like you could have a wardrobe and wear Celine from sort of 5, you know, if she carries on, you know, in 10 years' time, and it still feel just as cool. And I think that's
in the same way
empowering.
as like Prada, for instance, it has the same power.
Although she doesn't kind of necessarily, I think that, the difference between her and Prada is that Prada will kind of play on aesthetics. They'll kind of go back to other eras, where she never really feels like she's plundering previous eras, which is what makes
she's created, you know, like, it's like in 2000, you know, she started in 2008 in September, and from then she just created this ongoing journey. You know, and you know, like, you know, so many designers, like, it, you know, each season's different, whatever. It's just there's this line, and things like that make people feel comfortable and feel good because you just can go back to it, and you know, even just on a real basic level, like purchasing clothing, like you said, I know if I buy this, it still works for me. As long as I'm into Celine, this is gonna work for me, you know, and also she takes like basic things and makes them like kind of like you said, puts it in the future, like what would pool slides look in the future? I was gonna have some, you know, fur, or like, you know, like if you could walk into Dover now and check out the collection, and they have the sweatshirts. And it's a sweatshirt, but then it has folded back on it. So just like it's a basic sweatshirt, it's a basic thing, but then she just does something to it that you wouldn't imagine, you know?
Because it's weird, isn't it? Because despite the fact that you've got items that become these sort of cult items, and then she did the same thing when she was at Chloe, you don't really feel like she's one of those designers that kind of designs for sort of fashion victims in a way. I mean, obviously some things will kind of get appropriated in that way, but she, but yeah, you don't feel it's that kind of ultimate, you better get this now or you're nothing. It's sort of, it's a bit more real.
Do you feel like the accessories have almost taken it to a tipping point with that, where they're so sort of prevalent wherever you look? Do you think it's taken it slightly in danger of becoming, for me, other than the Chloe Paddington, I don't think I've seen so many bags constantly. But do you think, for a lot of designers, I think that would devalue their brand slightly? Well, not devalue it, make it seem really popular, but maybe make it feel less exclusive.
Yeah,
because you see so many teen girls with Celine bags, like the Kardashians have Celine bags. You know, it's like a
I don't know,
but it still feels fashion. I'm interested in how she's done that.
I think that's how the mass market buy into luxury fashion generally, like is through accessories, and so through, I mean, kind of girls who aren't necessarily into high fashion or know much about high fashion or know who Phoebe is necessarily.
But why do they want the Celine ones then?
Status. I think it's a status thing.
Yeah. That's interesting.
No, just what you said, like, for the, you know, the uneducated, and I don't mean that to put anyone down who does that, that's how they can buy into it. Whereas, like, if you're a girl and you're 16 and you listen to Kanye's album, you heard him say Phoebe Follow, and you saw his Coachella performance, you saw him with the shirt, you know, like, you walk in there, you're not gonna buy the sweatshirt with the arms rolled up, with like kind of like it's bluish and this, that, and the third. You probably won't get that because you're not there yet in your life, maybe, you know, but, you know, just, it's a bag, or like the kind of like the gold bracelets, gold plated bracelets and things like that. You could just buy into that, and I feel like you're like, well, does that kind of like ruin it for the designer? It's like that's out of their control, you know. Like I feel like no matter what kind of bag she was designing, those girls or those people would buy it. Same thing with the sunglasses and accessories, you know.
Yeah, there's a little host of those top brands that they'll buy into, kind of whatever.
You know,
you've got like Fendi and Celine and you know, LV.
Because someone knows that's someone knows that's a conversation piece, whereas I'm not saying the sweatshirt or the, you know, like the trousers aren't, but that's just a direct, oh, that bag, those glasses, or that necklace, and then you get to say, oh, it's Celine, and you know, they get their little rush.
Should we see what she's done for this season? This is a bit of a surprise to me.
Me too.
We've been talking a bit about minimalism, and I was actually going to ask, with all this logo mania and print mania that we've seen, are we seeing the death of that kind of ultra chic Celine look? And I was going to ask whether you thought that print and logo mania were kind of a reaction to that. And then I'm looking at this, and that question seems kind of like, I don't know, are you guys surprised to see that opening look and this second look?
Yeah, really surprised. Because if there's one thing, exactly as you said, there's one thing you associate with Celine, it's this kind of purity of vision in a way. I mean, you know, last time I was expecting we'd see kind of more materiality, something really kind of super innovative, really high-tech fabrics maybe. But definitely not print.
Do we think, to sort of actually ask that question, do you think that all that logo stuff we saw was a reaction in any way to years of kind of minimalism and real sort of simplicity being in fashion? Do you think that was a reaction, or is it just fashion tides coming and going?
I think it's just fashion tides. Like, I mean, there's nothing less fashionable than something that was very fashionable within the last 5 years. So I think it takes a while. Like, logos had their moment, and it's enough time's elapsed for them to be back.
Plus, I think, you know, because you've got all these other markets that kind of hugely rising, like, you know, even sort of India and China, that all of a sudden, you know, some brands rather than designers, maybe kind of fashion houses are much more wary of all of a sudden these other markets that they're plugging into. So it's quite a useful way to hook some of them in.
Can we just go back to the second look we saw? Sorry, just to give you a bit of info on the collection. So the Graffiti, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this, it's really embarrassing. the inspiration was Graffiti by Brazai, and the soundtrack was like George Michael's Soul to Soul, and there's lots of colour on the seats. As you can see, they're all sitting on these kind of coloured blocks. So she's looked at graffiti this season.
Yeah, it's one of those things, again, that looking at the image, you don't get that. You get a kind of a big red t-shirt with some black swirls on it. Whereas if you were at the show and you felt that mood and you kind of read your press release on your seat, I guess it makes more sense.
We were talking about how she doesn't make stuff for fashion victims, but actually that t-shirt is going to be
I take that back now. I hadn't said that.
I'm like, oh God, I'm going to be sick of that.
But graffiti is a bit of a theme at the moment, like in the Prada show, the girls, graffiti was a big theme, and Mutual asked loads of mural artists to design for the collection. I think, art has become a bit of a
and especially art that's connected to kind of people reclaiming art and sort of culture themselves in a way, in this sort of more democratic kind of art rather than just high art, I think.
And then also, again, we talked about last week, just streetwear, where how it's come back so strong, you just see it seeping through everything, even it's 4 people here, 2 of us have prints on our shirts, she has Joanne, you have on, Supreme Basquiat, it's just...
I love that, by the way.
Oh,
I love
thanks,
Basquiat. I was so jealous when you came in, I was like...
and I think Phoebe's actually, despite the past few seasons or few years, she is a street designer in a lot of ways. Like, I was reading when she was at St. Martin's, she used to have like gold teeth and stuff. Like
she's that old pop cover where she's pole dancing. That's the best thing.
Yeah. And I was talking to Terry Jones about this before I came on Friday, and I was like, oh, I'm doing Celine, and then he said, okay, well, why do you like fashion and why do you like Celine because of that? And I was like, well, I really like the kind of woman who wears Celine. It's really hardworking. It's really this. And he was like, no, she's a clubber. Like she's a street designer, and gave me this whole new opinion, which. Here it is.
Well, she was really credited with kind of bringing that edge to Chloe when she was Stella McCartney because of that street aspect as well. That, like you say, with her Nike Air Max, it's like that's always there, that kind of undercurrent, isn't it? And that sort of 90s, 80s, 90s sort of.
Yeah.
And and at St. Martin's at that particular time when there was a much more kind of the energy then, which still at that point I imagine revolved around the club scene quite a bit, so I'm sure that would have fed into it.
And it's her age too, she's 39 or something?
Yeah.
Because she graduated in 96 from St. Martin's, so she's pretty indicative of the world she kind of came up in, like those Air Max she wears, those are the 95s, like that was, that's what was actually coming out, so I just feel like there's that, and I feel like she represents that niche, London girl who's kind of they were out and then they got their dad's coat on and then a pair of jeans but then an amazing top and then again some sneakers on because they're going to be out all night.
Or running to work in their workwear but with their sneakers. Kind of that. I wouldn't associate asymmetry with Celine, I would with Chloe. This kind of, takes me back to that amazing Chloe collection she did, that was absolutely everywhere. There's a lot in this that feels new other than just the prints.
The proportions, the kind of hemline, she hinted at that in this collection this time last year, where there's kind of frayed hemlines, and it's quite a similar jagged edge to a lot of these looks.
Yeah.
I think, there is that, again, with last season she did say, wasn't there, that when she had the kind of, the shopping bag coats on and things like that she's starting to play a bit with that idea of domesticity a little bit, or not domesticity, or kind of the slightly more mundane aspects of everyday life. Again, the sort of, you could call it the street aspect, or you could call it the domestic aspect, but that with high fashion mixed together. So I suppose you can see some of that coming together. I mean, with Celine, it's never going to be sort of thrown together, not in the way that sort of the Roland Murray sort of show looked, but just a little bit of that kind of undercurrent of some kind of reality.
And also, what she does, and she's doing here, kind of. My friend, I got this from my friend, he always says putting the wrong thing in the right place. So she puts something you wouldn't feel, whether it's the print, obviously you hear the prints or something like that, in a place that almost feels uncomfortable, but then you're like, this works,
Yeah.
We've talked quite a lot on these panels about ugly feeling new, and this seems quite prevalent with this collection. Is that what makes it, I ask this every time because I'm really, really fascinated by it, but is that what makes a designer really great, doing something that is ugly and kind of a slight, you have a moment where you don't like it and then you like it. Is that what makes something feel new? Because I think that's a very Prada thing. You mentioned Prada before, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the pool slides and with what we're seeing here, I mean, it will catch on. You know, everyone will. It's unexpected from her. I wouldn't say it was ugly necessarily.
It's a bit risky.
Yeah.
It's like those bags you carry shopping, and you're like,
yeah.
I love that.
It's quite ravey.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting what you said before, Katie, because I think she's been nodding to certain things in the past couple of seasons, but this feels like a firmer departure from what we'd expect.
A firmer departure away from kind of this super pristine woman.
Yeah.
Maybe that was a kind of reaction to worrying that actually this woman was becoming so untouchable, that she was becoming kind of so aloof that actually there was no kind of emotional connection there, and maybe that's sort of bringing that back slightly, because there was that risk, isn't it, that it's almost like a woman that looks like she'd be too afraid to even sit down, and it's like amazing, but amazing in like a sort of airproof, you know, stain-proof bubble somewhere. But so this feels like maybe it's got some kind of roots in.
This doesn't feel aloof at all to me. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely.
What do you think of what we've seen, Sarah?
It's almost like she's created a diffusion line, and this is the risky line of this is like the risky part of her brand, which is really interesting to put that on the catwalk.
That's actually really true. It feels youthful. I think you said ravey before, but
this feels almost more sort of com or like Yoji influence or something. It feels like it's got that sort of,
in that case.
Yeah, that sort of just like Japanesey kind of like bit cavalier kind of like let's go totally off track with it.
It's definitely probably the first one I've seen where like if I didn't know it was Celine, I wouldn't have known.
If I saw that thumbnail,
you know what I mean. Like if I saw this one, I wouldn't be like, oh, that's Celine, or any of the other ones. You know.
Yeah, that's actually really, really true.
Yeah, because there's always something about Celine where you kind of feel like she's this sort of super elegant, super cool, like but sci-fi stormtrooper in some way, whether it's the kind of cut or the materials. Whereas this, totally different.
I think it's perfect timing as well. Like the way we've all been talking about the brand, we've all got this set aesthetic in our minds, and I suppose everyone has. And it's nice that we're totally surprised. That's obviously the mark of good designer, who can change what you think.
Yeah, that isn't just pumping out another collection to keep LVMH happy.
Yeah.
See, that's going to be such a shock to the average Celine woman.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Isn't it?
But then I'm thinking of the women who I know who wear Celine, like Caroline Newell, who used to be fashion editor of ID. She's obsessed with Celine. Laura Bradley, who used to be at Show Studio, now another obsessed with Celine. They'd wear this. Like it kind of makes sense if you think about the women who are already on the Celine.
To me, it feels like how they already wear the Celine. So they're obsessed with the Celine, they buy the Celine, but then they style it in a way that isn't perfect woman in an airtight bubble. And maybe this feels more suggestive of that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's also the practicality of her having babies and having to look after them and run around after them.
Yeah, and how old's her daughter now? Like she must be growing up, and
she's not.
Yeah, again, that goes back to the thing I was saying. I think I read that in Purple, but she's like, I was in this place when I had kids, and I'm having my kid, and that's how she designed clothing. So maybe, like you said, her daughter's a little older, and maybe she's back in the clubs. I don't know. She's back out.
I think she's got a couple of
maybe she was at my party last night.
It's like part rave, part children's building blocks. She's like,
it's
like the toils of modern mother.
Maybe she's like nostalgic for her youth because she's got 3 kids now. So maybe
she's back in the streets.
Maybe she's desperate to get back. Yeah.
I think that.
Sorry, go Sarah.
I think contrast has always been part of the Celine look, and it's always been kind of masculine, feminine touches on masculine cuts. It's always been quite diverse, like in its form, and I think this is just another one of them.
Yeah. No, that's actually very true. Do we like to see this kind of, you say contrast, and it kind of ties with what I wanted to ask about.
That's a great look.
Seeing street culture mined so much. Does that ever get slightly annoying when we see, there was a piece in Business of Fashion about this kind of vogue for goth in fashion, and we saw it a lot with that punk thing, obviously with the Met's punk exhibition, and we saw a lot of people doing kind of punk lights. Is it ever tiring to see sort of, I know streetwear, as we put it, is kind of very popular in terms of the shapes, but is it quite frustrating to see street culture kind of appropriated so
I think it's most
rapidly?
Interesting when you go and see people appropriating kind of real street culture, because I think there's that sort of the fashion perception of what street culture is. Yeah. And as a little bit what we saw with sort of Rick Owens, all of a sudden there are these other pockets, but those designers had to kind of get out there and actually observe those or have people that observe them for them, almost more in the sort of in the way that Hedi Slimane did with his sort of obsession with going shooting people in Miami and music groups and things like that. I think there's a few kind of stock groups that people will go to in terms of sort of street culture or subculture, but there's way more, because it's like folklore, isn't it? This stuff evolves and continues to evolve, so it's about finding out what's really going on out there and more unusual.
And you could say the same thing, you could apply that to her as a designer. Like, everyone thinks they know what she is, and she's like, well, there's a lot more to me than that, and here is an entire collection to prove a pocket.
Yeah,
you know.
Because what I love about her is she is so private. I mean, she's made some comment earlier in the year where she said, I think after the last collection, where she said, you know, the chicest thing in the world is being invisible on Google.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool, because there's something about that kind of intimacy and clarity that you sort of feel like she doesn't want to talk about her collection so much. She feels that they sort of speak for themselves, and you do get this incredible.
They don't sell online. There's always that little bit of kind of pulling back.
Yeah, that, you know, I was genuinely super excited to be on the panel and to see this today, because you don't quite know what you're going to get, and I'm not disappointed at all. That's for sure.
I think she's going to have to talk about this one though.
There seems like there's more to. Yeah.
But I hope she does what. It's really interesting actually that you mentioned Prada, because when you mentioned Prada, I was kind of like, no, it's more like Jill Sander. But now when you said Prada, I'm actually, yes, it's that thing where no one quite knows what her inspiration is. She'll probably contradict what everyone thinks. And I like that she's kind of keeping us all on our feet. What do you think of those big circles? We saw them on the belt. What do we think of some of the shapes that we're seeing here and some of the kind of detailing? No one wants to speak. Everyone's like, it's nice.
I'm trying to think of it not from my own perspective, because from my own perspective, I just couldn't go there, I don't think. But I don't think that means it's a bad look. Do you know what I mean?
The belt was interesting. Like, I mean, that kind of circle clasp on a belt is very. When was I wearing that?
Yeah, no, it was very 90s. It's very retro, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's something about that sort of.
I was never wearing that.
You're like, I'd like to distance myself from this conversation.
Or distance yourself from that period in your life. Something almost more sort of pirate-esque, but again, I mean, that almost is like almost that sort of new romantic feel to it in a funny kind of way.
Well, it's things that you recognise, but in a totally different context.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
I mean, that's that modernity thing again, even though here, I mean, I'm sort of backtracking slightly, saying that you never notice things from the past, she doesn't plunder the past, she has here, but she still makes it subversive enough that it still feels modern to me.
Well, it's very eclectic, but it's changed enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Stuff is great though, it is beautiful.
It feels incredibly modern, I think that's the thing. Whilst being there's a real nostalgia to it, but it still feels like it's very sort of forward looking for her, you know, it feels like a step forward.
Do we think it will sell as well?
It'd be interesting to see how the die-hard fans take it, whether they stick with it or not. Might introduce a totally new audience, who knows?
I think some of the shapes are quite traditional, Celine, like that kind of wrap over coat, very chic. I'm sure in the commercial collection we'll see that in a very simple palette. And I think as much as some of that asymmetry surprised me in those pleats, that shape, for example, of that coat in a camel is very signature Celine.
Yeah.
I think the accessories, like, it's hard to see the footwear that well, but I'd be interested to see.
That's a great look as well.
Yeah, that's really chic actually.
And it's hard for it to be as much of a statement, even though it's much louder as a look than, say, a camel coat. It's kind of, as you were saying, you know, you wouldn't necessarily recognise this as Celine.
And maybe she wanted to kind of not pull the rug, like I said, we may never know her, you know, she speaks about it, but pull the rug under that, like, what is Celine look is. Maybe she just needed to do that for her, for that part of the journey, like pull the rug and be like, I can just do it for herself, you know. Do you think maybe she got, you know, I don't know. I could just see her being like, I just feel like I see this. She stretched herself.
In the same way that like Raphael Kube does and Yoji, and how they're so praised for doing that. Like, you know, there is a sort of thread, but they can go from huge pop colours to like, you know, Ray's last collection, like kind of almost fetish and really, really dark and gothic. Yeah, she's just.
Because the thing is, when you look at these, I mean, it's kind of louder. It's much more high energy. Some of it's ravey, but a lot of the looks, like I mean, they're ultimately they are kind of wearable. I mean, they're wearable for someone that's kind of pretty fashion forward and quite brave, you know, knows who they are. But then she's always been for women that definitely know who they are. But that in comparison to kind of when you see like the Marc Jacobs collection, where you're like, wow, I mean that's tricky, tricky to pull off. You still feel that there's something kind of attainable here. It's the print again. It's the kind of tea towel.
Yeah, she did it on that polo neck on the look before. Do you think this will pull in a new audience? Because we've been thinking about that on the panels recently, especially over Paris, of how designers sort of take their brand forward in terms of exciting a new audience. And it seems to me that the lazy thing that designers do is just do something that seems younger. And whilst this does feel more youthful, it feels like she's not just doing something kind of like what we saw with Balenciaga, where Alex Wang just made everything really short. Do you think this will pull in people?
I think it will. I think it will pull in a younger audience that I think probably might have again found Celine almost completely unobtainable and an unassailable woman, whereas this, because of that those kind of references to rave culture, it will make it feel more relevant. I mean, I don't think she'd have done that kind of consciously because she's trying to pull in a new audience. I think she's a leader, and people will sort of, they'll be following her sentiment. But yeah, definitely, because I think, if you carry on that trajectory, it would be quite hard to a lot of people to kind of mine that, really.
I also think the trousers, some of those sort of more tailored pieces she did, it just started, for me, who wears those to work? There's that kind of that thing of changing ways people dress, and this seems a lot more kind of relevant in terms of how women actually put their looks together. And I think talking about her being a leader, if you're going to be a leader, you have to change direction, otherwise you'll just go alone along the line forever. It's
like David Bowie and his albums, isn't it? If you just keep churning out the same thing, I mean, you might even have one here and there that actually isn't critically, acclaimed, but nevertheless, it's important for your sort of, progression. And she's obviously a designer that hopefully, I'd imagine, that we'll be seeing in 20 years' time.
Yeah, and then maybe it's just a basic thing like she's a designer, she's an artist. Like these people are artists, like so she could just live with herself, and be happy doing what she's doing, not doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it has to be conceptually relevant, doesn't it? Yeah.
You say conceptually relevant. What do you think this says about the times we're in or the state of fashion at the moment? It's a huge question.
I think it's maybe to do with sort of bridging that gap between, youth, street culture, high fashion, who's fueling whom, where are we pulling our influences from, who are we designing for, this kind of slightly bigger mashup now. I think these worlds are all starting to converge a lot more, and for me that kind of, it's a bit representative.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good answer, because I just feel like that's what's happening in the world for us. These things, like it's all becoming just lifestyle.
Yeah.
Whereas you said, when you were growing up, and the fashion was here, and I talked about that too. It's not, fashion's not here. It's right next to music. It's right next to how you live. It's right next to raising your kids. It's not all separated anymore. So I
think that issue of who's influencing who is really interesting, especially given what you just said, especially with things like music. You mentioned Kanye wearing the shirt before, but you can flip that round and think about the influence that musicians, people like Kanye, have on the way that people dress. And it's quite interesting this week, given some of the comments he's made on influencing fashion. But I think you can't deny that anymore, the kind of, the kind of influence that music has on fashion and vice versa. And I think it's an interesting time. And are you guys interested to see how that moves forward? And
they have a symbiotic, relationship, music and fashion. You know what I mean? Because, when you even look at it, like how many actors are really like fashion icons? You can kind of count them on your hands. Whereas musicians, we could sit here and rattle them off. We could just do the 70s, we could do the 60s, we could do the 80s, we could do the 90s, we could do right now. It's just a symbiotic thing about like music, and because it's all vibe, it's all feeling. That's what music is, and that's what fashion is. It's a vibe and a feeling. Like there was a vibe and feeling in London in the 90s that she lived, and she's still putting out. And there's a vibe in New York in the 50s and stuff when Miles and all those guys were there, and the fashion was a part of it. Miles with his Brooks Brothers suits, it was all tied in. It's the same thing now. It's always going to be like that. So yeah, definitely.
Because it's kind of like tribal expression, isn't it?
And I guess that goes into not to defend Kanye, but it goes into what he's saying. He's saying like not being taken. He's really like, well, people don't hold music in that regard, so then I'm not taken serious when I'm trying to do art. When he's like has the same type of takes the same type of dedication and work and care and intelligence and feeling. So why can't I apply that to this? Because they're right there for me.
Do you find that with working at ID? Did you find that, I know the title's always kind of looked at music and looked at broader culture, but do you find that your readers have a greater interest in the relationship between musicians and fashion?
Yeah, definitely. 100%. Like, when it's our audience are as interested, if not more interested, when Kanye releases his new album to when Fashion Week happens. Like they are, no one's one thing anymore. No one's just interested in fashion and nothing else. Like people, especially with the new generation, are becoming a lot more, rounded. Everything's the same. They don't want to go to this page to see their music and this page to see their fashion. They want to have everything that they want at once on one page.
And do you think there's more interest in people that sit across different worlds? So people like, to criticise them, you call them the slashers, the models / bloggers / but is there more of an interest in people who are DJs and models, or musicians and fashion designers? Have you noticed that in the people you cover in the magazine?
Not really. I think maybe the opposite. Like I think as a consumer, you want everything that you enjoy in the same place. You don't want to have to work to, you don't want to have to spend any energy going on another website or another blog to find this. You want everything in one place. But then from the other point of view, it's a trust thing. Like if you rely on one person to give you your music knowledge, you're not necessarily going to trust them when they start giving you some other kind of knowledge.
Because I think there's a really big difference between, being an artist that uses fashion to express yourself, which is key, because, the look and the sound and all these things, it's all part of this vision that you're creating, this world that you're imagining. But there's a big difference between using fashion in that way, whether or not you have a stylist, and being a designer yourself. Yeah. It's like a whole different world. And I think, I'm sure a lot of people that read ID online, they're very shrewd. And it's not saying that you can't be talented at a lot of things, but there is like, everyone's right to be a little bit suspicious or speculative about someone that says, I'm a designer, I'm a world's biggest music star, and I'm an architect. I think there's a level where you're a bit like, these things require huge amounts of expertise. And it's not that you can't be those things, because lots of them sort of feed off each other. But nevertheless, we all want people that really.
Maybe that goes back to what we were admiring with Phoebe Philo, is that I'm a designer, that's what I am, that's what I do, and kind of pulling away from all that world
stuff.
Maybe that's part of the. This look really surprises me. Sorry, Sarah, you were going to say something and I cut you off.
I was going to say I think it's really sellable. Like people assume they're going to be much more sellable if they have loads of different strings to their bow. But in the same way that like social networks, if you spread yourself too thinly, like each thing becomes less valuable on its own.
People just want to know what you can do and what you can do well, rather than lots of different things.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you can do loads of things well, but you have to prove that you can do those things well substantially. It's about being a substantial artist in those fields.
Yeah, just not dabbling. Because now it's so easy to dabble in things. You can use music as an example. Like now, I give you an example. Like I got a call from a company to DJ, right? I don't DJ, so I didn't do it. I could have made a lot of money doing it, but I don't DJ. I don't dabble in DJing. I'll throw a party, I'll host it, I feel like I have a reverence for music, so I'll be like, this DJ after this one, that'll work. But I'm not gonna ever, you probably never see me DJing unless there's a moment where I fall in love and I'm like, you know what, I wanna start DJing. Whereas I feel like now people would never have done that before. And it's happened in so many fields. I'm just using it as a microcosm where no one would ever DJ because you had to bring your crates and have your vinyl, and if you weren't doing the right thing, and people would just leave. Where it's come to a point where there's such an acceptance of mediocre things, where if someone's at a party and it's a fashion party or whatever party, they just stay even if the music isn't great, where it wasn't like that before. The music wasn't right at, I don't know, studio, I'll bring that up again, people, they wouldn't go, your place wouldn't work. It was about the music, the center third, so.
Yeah, it's the risk of being a jack of all trades and a master of none, isn't it? You see it a lot with kind of magazines as well, that all of a sudden people are putting magazines online. And you have to know who you are, like ID Online, really know and have really, really good content, because I think there was that thing where people are like, wow, we've got to pump out all this stuff all the time. We'll put any old content on there. And that sort of acceptance of mediocrity can be so damaging, and that helps sort of sort the wheat from the chaff, really.
The DJ thing's interesting because like everyone in fashion DJs.
And I'm not trying to knock anyone, do what you want to do, but it's just, for me, that doesn't work, But it's funny, speaking of DJ, like, I feel like what she did with this collection is, what my friend did last night is, basically he had got a call the day before, and the person's like, oh, I want you to come DJ this event for me, and he's like, oh, I can't do it. And then she's like, oh, but I want you to do it because you do this and that and that, and you're that type of DJ. So then last night he played such a different set, and then the guy who runs the spot's like, A-Side, you played such a different set. What brought that about? And he's like, because I got this call where I felt like I've been put in a box, that this is what I play. And so he totally went left. And I feel like maybe that's just what she did with that. She just went left in a way that's still real. So the records he played last night was still real to him. They still worked, but he just wanted to take his journey somewhere else, because that just happens in life. You get in your routine. even whether you're, huge fashion designer or you're a bin man, you get in your routine and you just do the same thing, and like sometimes you need outside things or whatever, or something, you have a moment of clarity where you're like, let me step out of that, because I can do more, I can show the world more,
and
show yourself
fashion's
more.
more keen than ever to put people in boxes as well. I think, we have London's this, Milan's this, like we're probably guilty of that with these panels, saying like, this is what these people like, this is what this designer does, all this focus on codes and what the house represents. And
hence the huge sort of, after when the shows are over, the huge sort of frenzy to trend everything, because all of a sudden that's a way to package it up in a much more commercial way and start pumping out, reasons for people to buy things because they're in certain trends, etc., etc.
And that's how things are sold in the world, right? It's easier to sell something if you put a title on it. And I guess maybe also it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the whole models and that. It's just like, all those things are just like, it's titles. So this is what a model looks like. It's just easier for people to get their jobs done, to understand things and live, is just having a title. And the people who stand out in this world is people who don't get caught up in their title. They're outside of that box. Because the title, no matter how great your title is, you can be creative director of Louis Vuitton, whatever, still there's a limit, there's a glass ceiling. Where if you're not caught up in that, you can go anywhere. You only limit your mind and your hard work. So.
Did we say there was George Michael on the soundtrack and things like that? Yeah. So it's probably when you're there, but like you said, it's really ravey. It's probably quite a joyous thing.
Which, whole vibe.
Which I think we lose. This is what we were saying with Rick Owens with the models. You lose that when you see a still of the models, because they're probably all so knackered. It's probably their fifth show of the day. None of them look particularly joyful. But is this the last look, Neil? Yeah.
It's quite rebellious, isn't it? There's been, if there's any themes coming through from the show so far, there's that bit of rebellion, I think, and that's following through here. Sorry, Sam.
Oh, I can't remember what I was going to say. There we go. I always like watching Issey Miyake because all the models smile. And with the Rick Owens thing, their expressions, it was so different, and you get an idea of the designer, what he's asked them to do.
Yoji was a bit mischievous. It was a bit kind of mischievous, get told for that. A bit kind of St. Trinians in a way, and I feel like there's that. And it's kind of weird because in some ways, we're looking at this in its spring, summer, but it could be autumn, winter quite equally. And so it feels like maybe people are kind of a bit bored of, designers are getting a bit bored of these are the commercial tags they've got on them, and actually they just want to break out a little bit. And Rick Owens is a cult label, and he's like, well, I'm going to do something and use a cult group or a cult phenomenon and use that, and she's a bit like, I'm going to go a bit ravey because actually everyone thinks this is the perfect shell here, and there's more grit to it, there's more emotion and more joy than that perhaps.
Because I think a thing with Celine is people put this thing like, oh, she has this perfect woman that she's designed for, where I think she's constantly trying to figure out who that woman is. It's not the perfect woman, and she's trying to figure it out each season with the clothing. She's trying to figure out who that woman is in her mind that she's designing for. And maybe in that mind, that woman's always changing, or maybe that woman was that woman for those last 4 years, but now that woman's this. So she's not really putting out the prototype perfect woman.
Do you think that comes from her being a female designer? Because I think this is a huge oversimplification, but you could argue that male designers often, they have a woman in their mind. It's much easier for them to design for a fantasy because they're obviously not female. But if you're a female designer, you're aware, even in your own life, when you have kids, when you get married, if you get divorced, when you break up with people, how much you change. It's much easier to kind of have this constantly evolving state of image of a woman in your mind rather than this fixed fantasy if you're a male designer. I don't know, do you think that authenticity comes from being 100%,
because I think like you said, the guy has the fantasy where a woman has the role model in her mind that may have existed as someone they knew, or maybe this someone they see. Where a man, I don't know if a guy can actually have that role model woman because he's not a woman.
And even if it is their mother or their sister, it's
still
something.
I tried to think of something eloquent to say, but
it's
not a woman.
I love how you're like, men just aren't as good. That's what I took from that.
No, you're totally right though, because thinking about like Roland Murray probably is the classic one that's kind of almost like created this vision of womanhood. Although he has done it, in part with someone like Sophia Neofita. She almost is the prototype for that woman. But then with this, undoubtedly as a woman designer, I think probably with Marnie the same that we were talking about last week, that there will be that like slight hint of practicality and how do you feel in these clothes?
Why are we seeing so? Because there's been, I don't know if it's just kind of journalism and it's a nice story, but there's been quite a lot made recently of this kind of the real success of lots of female designers doing really well, being Jill Sander, Roxanne Illinchik, Mary Katranzi, Stella McCartney, and people are talking about it as if it's like a time for women. Do you think that's the case anyway? Are consumers savvy to that? Do you think there is a real thing that you can notice when it's a woman designing for a woman?
I think, I mean, how we were talking about when mass markets buy into brands, I don't think they're that aware of what gender the person designing is. Maybe at the top level of the industry you can tell slight things. Like with Celine, there's always something feminine. It's never 100% masculine, and it's never really that feminine.
So we'd say it's not helping people buy into the collection, but maybe it is changing the design that the designer's putting out there. So it's shaping the aesthetic, but it's not shaping people buying into it, the gender of the designer.
Yes.
You're like, what do you think about it, Katie?
I was going to say, I do think there's a sort of zeitgeist for, I think there's a lot of brands out there for all kinds of different sectors of the market, thinking about the fact that women are more sort of empowered in the workplace than they're ever used to, that all of a sudden they've got this, whether it's technology or fashion or whatever, that they've got to think about how they respond to women. But then I do wonder whether really it's just as a woman sort of looking at these collections, whether it's just about kind of what kind of a woman you align yourself with, and there's probably lots of women that actually really like that ideal of the Rona Murray woman, so actually that's equally as sort of viable for them. I don't know.
This woman's more difficult, isn't she? She's not as...
Yeah.
Who is this girl that we've seen? Who's the Celine girl this season?
Very tough.
Tough?
Yeah. Like, the Celine woman is always tough, I suppose, because it's always such straight lines and it's, never particularly frilly.
I think that's such a good point, that toughness, because you talked about that before, she seemed untouchable before, and I think while this is much more accessible in a sense of it doesn't feel as polished, there's still that toughness.
Yeah.
Maybe that is a real common thread.
Not impenetrable, but it's still not, a warm woman.
Yeah.
As it were, is it? Do you know what I mean?
But like strength,
which
though.
I don't mind at all.
Strength.
I like it.
Yeah, like Celine. When I look at the stuff, it's just strong. Just strong. You know what I mean? Like it's just strong, and that obviously that's the type of woman that's probably wearing it.
Yeah, I like it for that reason. I feel it's quite empowering for women, all her collections, because I feel like whether they're difficult to wear or not, they're not. It never feels that sort of frippery, flippant sort of sexy, or sort of crowd pleasing necessarily. It feels a bit more like it's personally pleasing, which I think is a good thing.
Sexiness is a good point, talking about male designers designing for women and female designers designing for women. But yeah, Celine is never sexy in the sense that, Versace is an oddball to what I'm talking about, but it's a different type of sexiness.
It's sexy, and that sort of slouchy women wearing men's clothes that can be super sexy, but it's for women that kind of know who they are and have like that sort of clarity of vision.
And
whereas,
it's also very fashion sexy. Like if you were to wear a full look Celine in southeast London, no one would think you looked sexy.
No.
But then, in the industry, do you think?
I would.
Yeah.
But maybe the general populace.
You're like, where's Celine, girls?
Yeah.
How do you think this will go down? I rarely ask that on panels, but I'm interested to what we think reactions to this will be.
I think everyone will be excited. I think everyone who's a fan of Celine will say the same that we've said, that this is really exciting and surprising and kind of a relief that we didn't realise we wanted.
Yeah, do you know what? I think that's a really good point. I think it's that she puts clothes out there sometimes which you didn't even know that you were sort of coveting until you see her do them. And that's a mark of a really good designer for me, because that's properly visionary. That all of a sudden you see it and you sort of feel like, my life probably would benefit from that. Not in a sort of deeply profound way, but but my wardrobe would benefit from that, not my life necessarily. Just a disclaimer there. But and that's a mark of sort of truly visionary designer, someone that isn't just sort of waiting and watching to be told by their audience. We talked about that a bit last week as well, about this whole thing on social media about some brands sort of catering to their audience too much. And she's a great leader. I think it's going to cause so much chatter, and I do genuinely think it will provoke enough chatter that you'll get a new audience with this as well.
I think she is sort of aligning herself with a totally different group of designers. Like, I'm looking at this and thinking, as we were saying before, this does but it has a similar vibe to Comme des Garçons, to Issey Miyake, to Yohji. And so,
she's kind of stepping out of that French chic kind of stellar thing and doing something.
Yeah, because before it's always felt kind of very sort of very Anglo-French, hasn't it? And this one doesn't feel so much that way. It feels a lot more left field to me than that.
So it's a breath of fresh air. We're refreshed by Celine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Good. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.